Today, we're diving into one of the most powerful and, I think, most needed teachings in all of Jewish thought. It comes from a sage whose name is basically a synonym for patience and love, Hillel the Elder. He left us a blueprint for a life of real meaning, and it all starts with this one idea: become a student of Aaron. All right, let's get into it. So just let that sink in for a second. This is one of the most incredible statements in the entire Talmud. I mean, to violate the Sabbath, that's only reserved for one thing: saving a life. So the question is, who was this man, and what could he have possibly done to earn an honor like that? The answer? Well, it tells you everything you need to know about the person who would later teach us all about radical, world-changing love. You see, Hillel's story doesn't start from a place of power or respect. It starts in poverty, with this desperate hunger for wisdom that literally brought him to the brink of death. Okay, so picture this. Hillel is a simple woodcutter in Jerusalem. Whatever he earns, he splits it. Half for his family, the other half for the entrance fee to the great study hall. But one freezing winter Friday, he can't find any work. No money, no entry. Now, most of us, we would have just gone home. But not Hillel. He climbs up onto the roof, determined not to miss a single word of Torah. He stays there all night while the snow is just piling up, listening until he's completely buried. The next morning, it's Shabbos, and the sages inside realize the room is getting dark. They look up, go to the roof, and they find him, unconscious. And even though it's the Holy Sabbath, they bring him inside, they revive him, and they declare that saving this man's life, well, it was more important than the laws of the day. This act of total self-sacrifice for wisdom, that's the foundation of everything Hillel would become. And what a journey it was. The Talmud tells us Hillel lived for 120 years, and his life was divided into these three perfect acts: 40 years in Babylon where he was born, 40 years as a student in Jerusalem, a student who started on a freezing rooftop, and then finally, 40 years as the Nasi, the president of the Sanhedrin, and the leader of the entire Jewish people. And this right here, this is the teaching that really defines him. It's his entire life's philosophy packed into one single sentence. It sounds simple, right? But believe me, every single word is chosen with unbelievable precision. So what on earth does it actually mean to be a student of Aaron? So the first thing you notice is Hillel doesn't say, be like Aaron. That would be impossible. I mean, who can be like Aaron, the first high priest? Instead, he says, be of his disciples. Be his students. A student is just someone on the path, someone who's learning. And that's a journey every single one of us can actually start. So let's break this down. Hillel basically gives us a 4-step process. First, you gotta choose your role model, Aaron. Second, you have to internalize his core values, which are loving and pursuing peace. Third, define who you're talking to, all of God's creatures. And then finally, the ultimate goal, drawing them closer to Torah. You see how each step just builds on the last one? So why Aaron? Why not somebody like Abraham or even Moses? Well, it's because Aaron's specific job as the high priest was to be the great unifier. His whole purpose was to stand in the tabernacle and represent all 12 tribes, connecting the entire nation to God, and maybe even more importantly, connecting them to each other. His very essence was about bridging divides and creating oneness. Then Hillel says to love peace and pursue peace. Now, this isn't just a poetic repetition. Loving peace? That's a preventative mindset. That means, not starting fights. But pursuing peace, that's the hard part. That means actively chasing down reconciliation after a fight has already started. And let me tell you, Aaron was an absolute master at this. Get this, Aaron had this brilliant strategy. When two friends were fighting, he wouldn't get them in a room to hash it out. No, he'd go to each one privately and say, your friend feels just awful. He's devastated by this, and he told me he really wants to make up. Then he'd go and say the exact same thing to the other person. Why? Because most fights just keep going because both sides are too proud. They're waiting for the other person to make the first move. Aaron just removed that barrier. And the impact of his work was profound. The Midrash tells us that thousands of children were named Aaron, not just in his honor, but because if Aaron hadn't personally stepped in and saved their parents' marriages from completely falling apart, those kids would never have even been born. He wasn't just mending friendships. He was literally rebuilding families from the ground up. And this right here illustrates the depth of that love just perfectly. When Aaron died, the Torah says the entire house of Israel wept, specifying men and women. But when Moses, the greatest prophet of all time, died, it says the children of Israel wept, which the sages explain refers mainly to the men. So what's the difference? Well, Rashi explains that the women felt Aaron's loss in this uniquely personal way. He was the one who had saved their homes. He was the one who restored peace between them and their husbands. So let's move to the next part of Hillel's teaching, because this is where it gets really interesting. This might be the most challenging, the most radical part of his entire statement. Love the creatures. So notice the word Hillel chooses here, briot. He doesn't say, love your fellow Jew or love your neighbor. He says, love the creatures, the creations. It's a term that is intentionally, radically universal. It applies to every single human being that God brought into this world, period. And here's the crucial point, as the book of Tanya explains it, this love has to be unconditional. Hillel is telling us to love people whose only merit might be the simple, basic fact that God created them. They might not agree with you, they might not be good people, they may not have earned your love in any way. You love them simply because they exist. This is a huge idea. Love has to come first. Now, Hillel didn't just teach this philosophy from an ivory tower. He lived it. The Talmud is packed with stories of his incredible patience, and it's most famously illustrated by this tale of 3 different men who came to convert, each one with a pretty challenging request. So the first guy goes to Hillel's colleague, Shammai, and says he'll convert, but only if he's taught the written Torah. He completely rejects the oral tradition. Shammai, who was known for being very strict, just drove him away. So the man goes to Hillel. Hillel says, okay, and starts teaching him the Hebrew alphabet. The next day, he reverses the letters. When the man gets confused, Hillel just gently says, look, if you have to trust me just to learn the letters, can't you also trust me on the oral law that explains them? The second man comes with an even crazier request. Teach me the entire Torah while I stand on 1 foot. Shammai, probably insulted, pushes him away with a measuring rod he was holding. Hillel's response? It became legendary. He said, what is hateful to you, do not do to your neighbor. That is the entire Torah. The rest is commentary. Now go and learn. He met this absurd challenge with the most profound simplicity and an invitation to learn more. The third man, his reason for converting was purely selfish. He wanted to become the high priest so he could wear the magnificent garments. Shammai, again, rejected him. But Hillel, he accepts him and says, that's an excellent goal, but first you've got to study the laws of the priesthood. So as the man studies, he comes across the law that says even a king couldn't serve as high priest, and he realizes, all on his own, the error of his thinking. Hillel empowered him to find the truth himself. Later on, these 3 converts actually met up, and they summed up the difference between the 2 sages perfectly. They said Shammai's impatience tried to push them away from the world, but Hillel's humility, his patient love, that's what drew them in. He was the living example of his own teaching. Love the creatures, and then draw them close to Torah. Okay, so this is all amazing ancient wisdom. But the real question is, how do we take this and apply it to our own lives right here, right now? Well, Hillel and Aaron gave us a pretty clear roadmap. Here are the takeaways. First, love peace. Just think twice before adding fuel to a fire. Second, pursue peace. Be the one to make the first move to make up. Your relationship is worth more than your pride. Third, love the briot. Really practice offering love to people simply because they are fellow creations, not because they agree with you. Fourth, lead with love. Build trust first. That's the foundation for everything. And finally, be patient. Just assume good intentions and give people a chance, just like Hillel did. So Hillel has given us this beautiful vision of a life that's built on humility and selfless love. But he was also a realist. And in his very next teaching, he gives a pretty stark warning about the opposite path, the path of ego and ambition. So the question he leaves us with is this: what happens to a person who spends their life building a name for themselves instead of building up others?